Welcome to the JavaScript coding examples, where we're going to be looking at arrays and some of the commonly used methods that you can use in order to manipulate the content of your array. My name is Lawrence. I'm going to be your instructor for this course. I come to you with many years of web development experience, and I'm ready to help you learn more about JavaScript and JavaScript arrays. In the upcoming lessons, I am going to be using an editor on the left-hand side, creating an index page that's going to be opened up in the browser on the right-hand side, linking to a JS file. So we're going to be making different JavaScript files for each one of the lessons, outputting the results into the console of the browser down at the bottom here so that we can see the results code that we're running within the JavaScript code. Source code is also included in a handy downloadable PDF guide. I do suggest that as you go through the lessons, you try the code out for yourself in order to get more familiar with what you can do with JavaScript. There are prerequisites to this course, as it's going to be covering applying the JavaScript code and the different array methods in JavaScript. We're going to be covering how you can use those methods to manipulate array data. You can use any editor that you want. I am going to be using Visual Studio Code, as well as you can use any browser you want that can render out the code. Let's get started writing some JavaScript code. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at how we can clean up the array contents and output the results. So removing out duplicates, false values, so empty values, falsy values, undefined, zero, combining, creating the new set, and also filtering out the Boolean values of the results is going to result in creating a brand new array with the filtered values. So these are all going to be unique values from the array with no empty values. Go ahead and create an array. So I've got an index file and linked to a JS file. So there's nothing within the index file. We're just linking it so that we can output the content within the browser. I've got the browser opened on the right-hand side and the DevTools console window at the bottom so that we can take a look and see the results from the JavaScript. So let's go ahead and we're going to create an array, add some content into the array. And these can be just a list of names. And also, let's add in some empty values into the array and then output the array into the console. And we'll do some cleaning up of the array contents. So right now we've got an array, we've got a bunch of empty items, and what if we want to remove out the duplicates from the array? So adding in some duplicates into the array. So now we've got 16 items in the array, and we want to filter out removing out the duplicates from the array. So we can really easily do that by creating a brand new array from the existing array contents, and this can be done using the new set. So creating an array and returning back within the array the new set value, and then using that original array as the constructor for the new set of values. So when we log out the new array that's been created, this will remove out all of the duplicates. And it's not going to remove out the undefined and the empty ones. So those are still available as they were just removed out the duplicate instances of it, but it kept all of the empty ones. So if we want to clean up the array, we can use a filter in order to remove out the empty and falsy values. So creating a second array, and this time we're going to use the original array and filter and returning back. And if we do a Boolean filter, so it's going to return back only the values that exist, so the ones that are true, so none of the falsy ones. So if we have undefined, null, all of those will be removed out. So let's add in null, we'll add in false, and also undefined. So these are all falsy values, as well as zero. So we want to filter out and clean up all of the non-values, so creating a second array, and this is a cleaned up version of the array, but in this one we have the duplicates. In this one we don't have any duplicates, but we've got all of the empty values. So let's create a third one. We're going to be doing a full cleanup of the array contents, where we're going to be removing out all of the duplicates, and then also creating a new set using the array, so that will filter out and remove out the duplicates. So create a new set, and the result will be the filtered response back from the original array. So when we do a console log of array number 3, this should give us a completely cleaned up array, removing out all of the duplicates and the falsy values. So that's what we got there as the result for the last item, where we've just got the 4 cleaned up items that were within the array. So it removed out the duplicates, removed out the empty values and the false values. So that's how you can do a cleanup of the array within one statement, return back the results. We're going to be exploring different ways to loop through the contents of an array. So creating an array using a for loop, where we're using the index value. The value of I is the index value in order to output the array contents. And then the while loop, which is going to be the same concept as the for loop, except it's structured slightly differently. And then the for each method for arrays allows us to loop through, get the item, the index, and the array that we're iterating through. And then there's map and filter, which are actually going to be returning back a new array from that existing array, but while it's going through all of the items of the array, you can also log out those values. And in this case, we're logging them out into the console as we're creating the new arrays. So there's the results for, there's the results for while, there's the results for each, results for map, and results for filter. So 5 different ways looping through the array contents. Open up your JS file, and we're going to create a quick array. So just adding in some data into the array and then loop through the contents of the array. So this can be a list of string values that we want to loop through and output the results. So I'm going to just have 4 names there within the array. Save that. We can log the array out into the console. I have the developer tools opened on the right hand side. That's where we're seeing the contents of the JavaScript console. So that's just being output in the bottom right hand side. So now let's loop through the contents of the array. So we've got a few different options that we can use. So one of them is using the for loop. So setting the value of I to 0. And as we know with arrays, they're 0 based. So the index value of the first item is going to be 0. And then we can loop through while we're looping through, and while the value of I is less than the length of the array. So within the arrays, we've got a property value of length. You can open that up and you can see the value of the length, and this will increase depending on how many items that we have within the array. So looping through and incrementing I by 1. And now if we want to output the result of the item from the array, we can use the array, and using the I that we're looping through and incrementing as the index value will allow us to output all of the items from the array. So that's how you can use the for loop. You can also use a while loop. So the idea is going to be the same, where we set a value for I, and then using while, looping through while I is less than the array length. So again, the same idea as the for loop, where we loop through, and then we also have to increment I within the while so that we have a way out of the loop. And then outputting the console value is going to be the same, where we have to output it using the array, and then the value of I is going to be the index value. So let's output into the console that this is going to be the while loop. This is an example of using the for loop in the example. And there's also a for each. So this is actually my preferred way to do the loop, and that's using the for each method, which is an array method that allows us to easily iterate through the array. So we set the array, and then using for each method, we can loop through each one of the items in the array and then output the results from that. And this is expecting a function. So you can use the arrow format as you loop through each one of the items, and you can get some values. So you can get the item value, you can return back its index, and then also the parent array as well. And then into the console, if we just want to see the item, we can output the item value. So this would be doing a for each loop, and that's the result that we have down here at the bottom. I'm going to add in some asterisks so that it's easier to distinguish which one that we're on and which one that we're doing. So we've got the for each, we've got the while, and then the for loop. So those are 3 different ways to output the content of the array. And there's also some other methods as well. So if you are using map, that's another way that you can output the contents as you're going through each one of the items in the array, and using map goes through each one of the items. And this is not going to be in place, so it's going to create a new array. So it's going to have a returned result, but it's still going to be looping through each one of the items in the array. We select the array, and then we do a map, and the map is going to have each one of those items. And then as we're returning back the items, we can console log the new values as we're iterating through. So this is going to be the map result. And then if we want to see the result for array 1, they're all going to be undefined. So for map, we need to return back the item value in order to populate the new array with whatever values that we have. And this is also a way that we can update some of the values. So if we want to return back a separate value, so we've got the item value, but within each one of these we want to include whatever the current index is. You can do this as well. So now if I loop and we get the value for array 1, that's going to include the original index values that we had. So map, what it does is it reconstructs and creates a new array from the existing array. There's also a filter method. So this is also going to create a new instance of the array, but we do loop through all of the existing contents of the array as we use the filter method. And filter can select out the contents and return back the contents of them. So that's going to be doing the same thing that we saw with map. And if we do a console log of the second array that was created, so this is a brand new array that was created, because we're not really filtering for anything, we're returning back all of the items, we're still getting all of the filtered items being returned back into the array. And we don't necessarily need to have the function code where we're doing a return back. We just need to select what we're filtering by. So if we want to filter by a string, that will do the same thing where we're looping through and we're using the filter. But if we want to output each item as it goes through, then we need to apply the function in order to do the result of the item. So that will create the filter, and once again we'll do the return of the item content from the filter, and that's going to output it into the console. So those are some different ways that you can loop through the contents of the array, and the last two, using map and filter, are actually creating brand new arrays as we're iterating through the contents of the original array. Could be manipulating the items in the array. So looking at some of the common methods where we can manipulate the array, and that's going to include the push, shift, pop, and unshift, where we're adding items either to the beginning or to the end of the array. And then there's also the string methods where we can just convert it into a string, or we can use the join method, and that allows us to set a specific character as a separator. And this can also be a set of characters that we want as a separator. And this is just expecting a string value within the join method. Let's go ahead and create an array, and then we'll explore some of the common array methods. So the array can contain some items. I'm just going to add in the first item, and then we'll add in a second item. So our array will consist of 2 items that are currently within the array. So when we output the array into the console, the arrays are going to come with a length property, and then each item from the array is going to have its index value, and that's how you can retrieve the values that are contained within the array. So there's a array push, and array push method allows us to add in a new element at the end. So this is going to be the end push, and we'll just create a new string value with end push. So that adds it to the end of the array. So now with the index value of 2, that's going to be our last item that's going to be in the array. We can also add the contents to the array. So if we want to remove out the first item of the array, and this is also going to have a callback value. So set it value 1. selecting the array and using shift is going to allow us to remove the first item from the array. So this is going to just return back whatever the first value is. I'll output that into the console, so then you can use that code in your script. And now when we look at the array, because we've removed out the value of Lawrence, it's not in the array anymore, and we're back down to 2 items. But for the value of val1 in the right hand side there, we do have a value of Lawrence that's being returned back for val1. So that's what we're getting output into the console. There's also a way to remove out the last item of the array. So the same way that we did the val1, let's do a val2, and using pop is going to remove out whatever the current last item from the array is. And we can output that value into the console as a variable. So what's going to get returned back within val2 is going to be this new item that we added in where we did the push that allowed us to remove out that item. So if we want to add an item to the beginning of the array, so we already saw that if we use push, it adds it to the end of the array. So we select the array, and then to add a new item, we use the unshift method, and this is going to be the start added value. And using unshift has now added that value to the start of the array. So shift removed it from the first item, and unshift added that back in. So if we wanted to, we could unshift whatever the value that we shifted out, and that's going to return back the array to its initial value. And we've added an item to the end, and then we've also removed that item, and that's why currently within the array we've got whatever the current value was within the array. There's also ways to convert arrays to strings. So if you want to output this value of the array and convert it into a string, so let's set up a variable and take the array, and using the toString method, we'll convert the array into a string. And if we console log out the result for string 1, this is going to be a string version of the array. So just comma separates out those values. We can also use join in order to convert it into a string. And the difference between join and toString, it allows us to set a separator. So if we just do a join of the array, that's going to return back the same result as the string. But within the join method, we do have an option where we can do a dash, and this should actually output the result of the string. So if we wanted to, we could do a dash, and that's going to now output the results of the items from the array into a string separated by a dash. And these can be any characters, so you can use the asterisk as well in order to output that value as a string. So these are some of the commonly used methods that you can use in JavaScript. So where shift removes the first, pop removes the last, push adds to end, unshift adds to start. So go ahead and try it out to get more familiar with what you can do with arrays. This lesson is going to be an example of how you can use map in order to update and create a brand new array from contents of an initial array. So we've got our basic array there, and then we're using map where we're returning back the items from the array, and we're combining the index and the item value. And then we're updating some of the arrays as well. We're going to create a new array. This is all going to be numbers, and then returning back a value of the number times 2. So it's going to be another array that we're going to be creating, and that's output within the console. And also how you can use the callback method and pick up the values of either the item, the index, and the array, and then use them within a callback function. Also how you can construct an array with a bunch of objects contained within it, and then rebuild it. And in this case, we've got an array with a first name and a last name. So these are the property names. We're going to be combining them using the map method into objects that just say full name, and they have the first and the last name combined, as well as a shorter format where we can do the full and have the full name combined within the one statement using map. Let's go ahead and create an array, and then we're going to use this array with the various array methods. So add in some default values into the array. So they can be strings, also numbers, and they can also just be Boolean values. So whatever values that you want to add into the array. So that will give us some items there within the array. And let's first output the array using the console log and output the array into the console. I've got the console opened up on the right hand side within the browser using the Chrome browser, and that's the dev tools that we're able to output the values there. So let's take a look at what we can do with map. So what map does is it allows us to create a brand new array from an existing array, and the results of the content that we're returning back. So as we loop through the existing array, we take the array, and using map allows us to map the content. So if we want to take the array and add content into it, we can get the array item as well as the index and the parent array as well. And then use those within the block of code as we're looping through the map. And then whatever we're returning back, so if we were to return back just item and output the result of the newly created array. So this is going to be a completely detached array, so it's not going to be attached to the initial array. Whereas if you were just to create an array and assign it to another array, these arrays are both going to be pointing to the same memory location. So updating array 2, and let's add a new value into array 2, will also update both of them. So both of those arrays are going to be outputting the same values, so it doesn't matter which one we are selecting. And when we use map, that's going to create a brand new independent array, so outputting a completely separate set of values. And right now what we're doing is we're returning the item, so that's why this is different. But if we were to, again, to push another value of new into array, that's not going to be present within the array 1 anymore. So it's not there, but it is within the array. So there's the two news at the end as well as array 2, because once again these are going to be connected and they're actually going to be outputting the same content. So you can reference that array content using ARR or ARR2, and when we use map, we're creating a new item. So within the map, we can create some variables and then return back that value. So instead of returning back the actual item, I'm going to return it back as whatever the variable is. And then here we're going to recreate a new string value, so using the index value of the array and then output the item. So we can separate that, and now the new array is going to have the index values of those initial items. So if we did have an array, so let's create a new array and add in all numbers within the array. And what we'll do is we'll do some math with the numbers, so we'll multiply them by 2. So because this array that does have some strings and other data types, it's going to make it a little bit harder. So create a new array and using the map and get the item from the array. And if we just want to perform one statement, we can return it back within the same line of code and take the item and multiply it by 2. So this can also, maybe we want to represent it as a value. So it's going to be a value of whatever we've got for the array, and we're simply returning back a doubled value. So this is a quick way how you can double the value of the contents of the array. So it's going to return back those contents of the array, and now they're duplicated. So within the map as well, you can do a callback. So let's create a function that will handle the callback. So this is our callback function. And within the callback function, we want to do the same thing that we did here, where we're going to do a duplicating. So let's create another array, so call it ARR5. And here we're going to take the value of ARR3 and then using map. And instead of adding in a value, we're just going to use the callback function. So this will just return back as the callback statement. So it will run this function, and if we want to get the value, we can get the values of the items within the array. So that can come in within the callback function And for now, we're going to output this, and we'll see what we get returned back. So right now, this is going to be still referring to the window object. So just as we saw before where we can use map and we can get item, index, and array, it's not going to be referencing the current object array, as this is going to be still referencing the window, but we can still get the item, the index, and the array the same way as we did within the original function. So those arguments are still going to be passed in, and if we're getting item, then we're returning back whatever the item is as we're looping through it. And that means that we can also do a return, just as we did before where we've got the item and multiply it by 2. So that's going to be the value that we're returning, and then ultimately within the console, let's output the new value of the new array that we've created. So that's going to return back a doubled value of the array, and using the callback method in order to accomplish that. So the return value is going to be the item that's going to be added into the new array. And the callback by default can pass in all three of these. Now you don't have to if you just need to use the item, then you can just use the callback in the item. And this is referenced in the order. So if you have the item as the first, then the second value is going to be the index, and the third one is going to be the array. So if we wanted to map out a set of objects that are contained within an array, so we're going to create another array. So call this array 6. And within this array, we're going to have a bunch of objects. And these objects are going to have a first name. And then as we loop through the objects in the array, we want to output the results of those. So that will just be a couple entries there. And these objects can contain multiple properties and values. So I'm structuring them the same, so that way, this way, as we're iterating through them within the map, we can make use of them. So let's do a return back, and we're going to create another array out of that array with the objects, and we can console log out array number 6 as well, so we can see it within the console. So setting up and assigning the array 6 and using the map. And as we map through and loop through each one of the items, and before we do that, we'll actually also add in to the object. So we'll get the last name as well. So this will be a property value for the last name. And then we'll do a combination for the last and the first using the map. So selecting out the contents and then returning back those values. And let's make sure that the structure is the same as we're looping through each one, that we're able to return back the proper values. So within the map, we're going to have the item, and then outputting the item contents. We'll do it within the console log. And then we can just do a return. Right now, we'll just do a return of the item itself, as we're not going to be changing anything within the item quite yet. Output into the console log the result for array 7, and save that. So now, right now, we're not getting anything different, and as we're looping through on line 26, we're just getting the object values, so those property values. So if we wanted to return back the values there, so if we want to get the first and the last name values of the object as we're looping through there, let's see what we get back here for first, not returning back the item. So if we want to just get the first names, so that will create an array of the first names. We're outputting the first names of the items in the object. Let's also output the last name. So there's the first name and the last name. So this way, we could return back a value. So set this up as using whatever the first name is, and then space that out, and also the last name. So this is going to just return back now the full names of the users. If you want to return it back within an object format, you can do that as well. We're going to return it back as an object, so that will mimic that current array of items, but we're going to be outputting it as an object. So let's just clean this up a little bit, where we're returning back and getting a object name of user, and then this user value is going to be the string value of the first and the last that we've got from the original object. So now when we open it, there's our original array of objects and items in there, and now there's our new updated one where we've just got the user and the full name that's being returned back, or we could call this as well full name, and that would work. That would work the same way where we're outputting the property name now as full name within the object, and this is all done with the map method. And there's also a way to shorten this, so let's do a shorter format of what we just did in array number 7, where we're going to take the array 6 data and then using map, and using the map data, the same as we did over here, we'll take that content, but we want to just simply return it back as whatever the full name is. So that's going to be returned back within this format, and save it. And now let's console log out what we've got for the results for array number 8. And I'll update this to just say full so that we can distinguish between the two. So right now we're still not returning back the object properly, and we're still getting the undefined being sent there. And that's because this needs to be wrapped in the rounded bracket as we're returning back the object contents. And now when we save that, now we've got the same structure, but we've done it essentially within one line of code where we've set that and we've returned it back as an object and combined the first and last name within the one array using map. So go ahead and try it out, and try out some of the different values that you can return back and how you can update and manipulate your array contents using map when you're constructing new arrays using the map method. We're going to be exploring how we can join arrays together, and also how we can duplicate an array using the concat method, and how arrays are working within relation to other arrays. When we're assigning one array to the other array, we know that there's a connection that it's using the shared data set using the memory location, and that's why if we want to duplicate array, we can use the concat method in order to make a separate copy of the array contents that's not going to be connected to the first initial array. The concat method allows us to join two arrays together. So let's open up the JavaScript file and create some examples of joining some arrays together. So we'll create our first array, give it a name of ARR1, and then within this array, let's add in some values that we can then join together into with another array. So that's a couple string values, and creating our second array. So this one can maybe have some numeric values, and then joining them together, we're going to join them together and create a third array that's going to be a joined version of the first two arrays. So select the array that you want to join with, and then using concat as the method, select the second array that you want to join it into, and then we'll output the result of array 3 into the console. So that gives us a combined of both arrays. You can also add in additional values into the arrays, so you can concatenate additional arrays, as well as adding in values directly within the array as we're concatenating it. So let's try another example where we're using the concat and then comma separate out and add in another set of values. So these are going to be a couple string values that we'll add to the end of array number 4. So when we make the concatenation, there's the first array, which is array 1, the second array, which is array 2, and then the third array. You can also join the same array multiple times together. So creating another example of an array, concatenating it. So we can set them all up as array number 2. And the result here will be just a combination of array number 2, join to array number 2, join to array number 2. So we can add in and join together multiple values all together within the arrays. So we know when we do create one array and we assign that array value to the previous array, those arrays are now going to be connected. So any updates to the one array will also update the second array. So adding in an item to the end of array number 6, and now if we output the result for array 1, it's also going to be the same as what we have for the array 6, because now those are going to be pointing to the same memory location. So the results and the values, if one of them is updated, is going to update both of them. So when you want to create a separate array, if you take the array value and then use concat and output the result that you have for array number 7, this is now no longer going to be attached to the array 1 and array 6. So if we do make another update to array number 6 and we add another item into it, it's not going to affect the array number 7, because this is a way to duplicate the array without having to assign it to the same memory location. And so this result is only going to be affecting the array 1 and array 6 that you can see here being output into the console. So this is another way that you can duplicate array by using the concat method. This example, we're going to be exploring the entries iterator, so how we can move through the different items within the array of the entries. And as we set up the iterator, so we're calling it adder, and then we can move through, and getting the value is going to actually return back the array of contents that we have with the index value as the first item in the array, and then the second is going to be the actual value of the item in the array. So we can use a for loop and loop through adder and then console log out each one of the items. And the reason we're using 1 as the index, because that's going to represent the actual value within the array, and we're just outputting it into the console. The other format is using a while loop. So this one looks a little bit more complex, where we're selecting and getting the entries, and as soon as we use the next method within the iterator, that's going to remove that content, that item. So we need to set a variable with the value of the callback response from adder1 next, which is going to be the first entry. We check to see if it has a value. If it does have a value, then we're going to select the value using the index value of 1. If we use 0, then that's going to be the index value of the item in the first original array. And then we set the value of val to be adder1 and move to the next item. And once there are no additional next items in the array, once it's moved through all of the items, then this while loop will stop looping through. And that's where we get the output of each item that we have within the array in the console. We're going to look at the array entries. So for that, we're going to need to have an array, and then we'll get all of the values that are contained within the array. So I'm just going to add in a couple string values into the array. In addition, we can have a numeric value there. So that will give us 3 values that we've got within the array. And now we want to do an iterator through the array. So let's select the array content, and I'll just call that adder. So this is going to be the iterator of the array, and then we can take the array object and get the entries. And if we console log out what we have for adder, that will provide us an array iterator. So that means that we can move through to see if an array has a next item. So in order to get the next value that's contained within the array, we could move it through, and we can use the next. So if within the console log, take the adder and return back whatever the next item is. So it's going to return back this object where we've got value, so the index and the value of the item in the array. So we can see the value by getting the value number of the item in the array, and save that. So that's going to return back the value, and the value, once again, it's just going to be the index value and the actual value from the item in the array. So if we do a next and then we do value, what gets returned back is going to be the second item in the array. So once you use the next, it's already going to move on to the next value. So every time you use the next method, it's going to move through to the next item in the array. So that's where we're seeing that when we're doing next value, we're getting with the index value of 1 and the second item in the array that's being returned back. So in order to use this, we can also use this within a loop, where we can use it within a while loop for checking to see if there's additional items in the loop. and then looping through each one of them. So let's do that where we've got a for loop, and the item will be represented, and then do a for of loop. So looping through the adder iterator, and then within the console, let's output the item, and we'll see what we get for the item of the array. So that lists out each one of them that we have within the array with the index and the property value. So if we want to get the actual value, then we can use the index value of 1, and now we're going to return back the values from the array. So this is another way that you can loop through the contents of an array, where you can set it up as the entries. Let's set this up as a while loop, and we'll create another iterator there. So we can't use this one anymore because right now, after we've looped through, adder is not going to have a next value. So that's going to be emptied out. The iterator is going to be emptied out of the values. So we don't have a next value. So we've got a length of 0, whereas initially we do have a length there. We can use the next. So if we do try to use next, and we see what we get returned back here, we're going to get a value of undefined because there's nothing left there as we've already iterated through the adder. So that's where we need to create another iterator, and we'll show you how you can use this within the while loop. So using the adder 1, and we can create it out of the same trees. Let's set the value of val as adder 1, and then use the next method, and it will loop through while the value of val exists, and then within the while loop can set it up to get the next value, and then here we'll just console log out what we have for the value of val. So that will list out all 3 of the items that we have within the array, and if we want to select the actual value, then we can return it back using the index value. So the val is actually returning back the array, and this will allow us to iterate through all the items of the array and output them into the console. So that's using while, that's using a for loop, and this is how you can just move through the different items that are available within the array object. This lesson is going to be about filtering. So we've got an array, and we're going to be filtering through the sum of the content of the array. So the first filter is going to be checking to see if the length of the string value, so only for string values, is going to be larger than 4, and it's going to return back the results larger than or equal to 4. So that's going to return back those first 3 items in the array. We've got that output into the console. The second filter is going to be using a callback function called checker, where we can still pass in all of the items, so the items, the index, and the array. And we're just simply checking to see if the value of the index is going to be larger than or equal to 2. So basically it's going to be returning back all of the items in the array that have this criteria that are matching to index value of larger than 2, and that's being returned back within the values there. Also for the next one, we are going to be filtering and only returning back the ones that have a type of string, so the data type of string. So that's where we get the 4 results coming from the array. And then we're going to be updating the array, adding in null and false value, and then using the filter in order to clean up the array and remove out any non-existing falsy values such as null, false, 0, and undefined. So any of the empty items within the array. So this is just a quick way to use the filter in order to clean up the contents of the array and make sure that there are values there. And then the last one, we're going to have a couple conditions that the item needs to be a string, and also that it has to have the first character of the string has to be uppercase. And that's going to return back both of those results into the new array. And those are the ones that are going to be matching the criteria within the filter. The array filter allows us to create a new array that passes a certain test. So first off, we are going to need an array that we can use, and then we can apply some testing to the array contents. And in this case, we're going to be checking to see a particular length of a word and only returning back the words that have a length that is greater than 4 characters. And let's create a new array. So this array is going to have the filtered results from the first array. So we use the filter method and then returning back whatever the value is of the item and the condition that we're checking to see if value, and then using the string length, checking to see if it's larger than 3. So that will construct a new array with the filtered results being returned back and only returning back the results that have a string length of larger than 3. Can also update this to be larger than 4, so that will get rid of the test. You can set it to larger than or equal to 4, so that would be 4 as a max value. There's also a way that you can set a callback within the filter, so that will allow you to pass in the element as well as the element index value, and then you can apply the filter with that type of format. So let's create another array, and this time we're going to use the callback, so the original array information, and then filter, and we're going to return back only the items with the index value that's going to be either 2 or larger. So we'll create a function called checker, and then within the checker function, this is where we can filter the different results of the array items, and we get the item value, we get the index, and then the array itself being sent within the arguments of the function. So we can see all of these. So we can see the item, and then we can also see their index value, and also see the entire contents of the entire array object that is being used within the checker. So right now we're not returning anything back, and what I'll do is I'll log out the results for array 2. And we're not returning anything back, so array 2 is being just returned back as blank. So what we want to do is we want to check to only return back the results that are going to be matching the condition. So return back and checking to see if index is greater than or equal to 2. And if it is, then we're going to return back those 2 values. So that's how you can have a condition on a callback when you're doing a filtering of the array contents. And you can have multiple conditions as well. So if we wanted to have another set of conditions, and we'll just do it directly within the filter. So we've got the item, we've got the index, and what do we want to return back? So what's the condition on the value if we want to return it back? So we want to have multiple conditions here on what we're returning back. So setting to check to see if the item has a data type of a string. So we can do type of item and check to see if it's returned back as a string. So that will only return back strings there. So if we had a bunch of numbers, that should not return back those values, and then output the result for array 3. So right now we don't have. Let's check using the console to see what we're returning back here for type of. And it looks like we are returning it back as string, but this is going to be lowercase. So that's why the strings weren't being returned back. But once we fix that, now we're returning back only the strings that are available within the array. If you want to return back the numbers, you can check to see to make sure the value is going to be a number. The type of is returned back as a number. So that will just return back the number values that are within the array. So select the array and we'll add in to it a value of null. Also add to it a value of false, so a Boolean value. And these aren't going to have lengths, as these aren't going to be string values. So only the strings that have the length, and then the numbers are also returning back as strings. So you're able to get a length for those values. So it's not being treated as a string, so it's automatically filtering through. So the numbers aren't going to have a length value, so that's why we're not able to return back the length there. filter here, and if we only want to just get the values that exist, we can just type in Boolean, and now this is going to only return back the ones that do have a value to it. So if we were to console log out the array before we do the filtering of the Booleans, we've got the null and the false there. So once we do the Boolean filter, this is going to remove out nulls, false, zeros, and anything that is a false value, and clean up the array. So it's a way that we can do a quick cleanup of the array. So let's say we want to return back only the string values that have has a string that has an uppercase. So we can do a filter for that as well. So this is going to be a little bit more challenging, where we're going to select the items from the array and check to see only the ones that have an uppercase as the first character. So when we do the filter, we want to select the item. We want to only select the string value, and then return back the ones that are strings and that have the first character is going to be an uppercase value. So let's create a temporary variable for this, and then we can combine the logic of what we're doing for it to get the Boolean value being returned back. So we want to get to see whatever the first item is within the array. So check to see if it's a string, and returning back the string value and change it to uppercase. So that's going to be the first character. And we want to see if the first character is going to match the uppercase first character. And if that is true, then that's what we're going to do the condition there. So we check to see if first is going to be equal to the string with the first character in the string. And we're going to throw an error here because these are not all the same data types. So before we do this, we want to make sure to see if the type of is equal to string. And if it is, then at this point we can do an uppercase and return it only if it's a string, and otherwise we don't have a return on it. So that will automatically filter that content through. So outputting into the console log the results that we have for array number 5. So that returns back only the 2 string values that are within the array that have starting with the uppercase and that are strings as well. So you can have multiple conditions. You can get fairly complex with your conditions. As long as they're able to return a Boolean value of either true or false, you can create these types of conditions in order to return particular values using the filter method of the string values. This lesson we're going to be returning back and checking to see if values are included within an array. So it's going to return back a Boolean value of true or false. Also, how you can use index of to return back the index of the first responded item found within the array. And that's just going to be returning back an index. In this case, it's returning back 1, which is the first item. And we do have it multiple times, so we can also use last index to find the last index value of the item. If there is not found, if the string value or the item value is not found within the array, then the index value is going to be -1. That's both on the index of and last index of. There's also a find index, and we're just using a callback here, as we're finding the index and we're checking to see what the first item is that has this matching string value, and it's simply going to be returning back the index value of it. So that's where we get the index value of 1 being returned back, because that's the first matching result for that string value. And then the last index value that we want is going to be that we're returning back the first one that matches this condition, which is going to be type of. So it's going to be looking through the array. The first number data type that we see is going to be returned back, and that's where we get an index value of 3 to match that criteria. Let's create an array, and then we're going to be using the includes method, which will allow us to determine if a certain value is included within the array. So create the array, And you can add in some item values into the array. So I'm just going to add a couple string values, and as well we can have some numbers in the array. And what we want to do is we want to check to see if the value is within the array. So let's create a value for Boolean, and it's going to be returning back a Boolean value. So checking to see if the array, and using the includes a value, and I'll just use my last name there. And then within the console, we'll check to see what the result here is. So the result is going to be true. If we look for a value that doesn't exist, so do that under boo2, and we'll be looking for a string value of test, we're going to get the result that's being returned back as false. So it'll either be true or false that gets returned back. And this is a way that we can check to see if a particular value is included. So this is slightly different than what we get with the index of, because index of is going to be returning back a position value using the index of the array. So the index value, and using the array, and then index of is going to check to see if the particular value exists, and it's going to return back the index value. If the item doesn't exist, then the index value is going to be -1 that gets returned back. So we see that the current value for this string is going to be in index of 1. Let's try that with the other value for test, and now we know that this one doesn't exist within the array, so we get a return back value of -1. So that's how we can know that it doesn't exist, or we can see that it does exist. There's also the last index of. So it works the same way as index of, but it's going to be going the other way. So if we want to see if a particular value is included several times into our array, so now I've just duplicated it. So I've got it multiple times in the array. So we're going to be checking to see if the last index value exists. So instead of index of, we're just going to prefix it with last index of, and this one also convert that to last index of test. And I'll just update this with an L. So that will be lind1 and lind2. So the last index of is going to return back, and it's doing it backwards from the end of the array. So returning back whatever position is for that particular item in the array. There's also a find index. So that's another way that you can get the index. It's going to return back the first result that's going to be matching the condition. So checking to see. And within the find index, and this no index of, it's just find index, is going to be looking for a particular condition. So whatever one matches the condition. You can also have a callback here. So I'll just do it call 1 and call 2, and then we'll create the callbacks. And you can make these fairly complex as well. So this is going to be find 1 and find 2. And then I'll update creating the callback functions. So we've got call 1 and then also call 2. So 2 separate callback functions. And then within the callback, we'll add in some results, or what we're going to be looking for the item. So this is going to be the item in the array. And if we console log the item, see that we get the results there being listed. So we can check to see if only the items, and return back only the items. So if we do a return of the item, and actually this, we'll just do a return of the item first. So what gets returned in there is going to get the index value of 0. So that's just going to return back whatever the first item is, because we're just selecting the first item. And then the second one is getting a -1 because we're not returning anything back. So let's add in a condition to see which one we want to return back. So we'll check to see if item, and if item is going to be equal to this value. And so this should return back the first matching result, and then we can return it back as the index value of the first matching result. So that's where we get 1. We can also check to see which one, if we want to use type of, and the type of item is equal to a number. So we want to return back the first number, and we'll return back the result for that. And that's going to be in the second callback. So it's going to find whatever the first number is within the array, and this is going to be 100 with an index value of 3, and that's what's getting returned back within the callback function of the find index method. So these are some of the methods that you can get the index value and also check to see if a particular value is included within an array.